Welcome to another episode of AgriTalk, and thank you for keeping it KTN Farmers TV. Today we are talking matters aquaculture, and with me today is Julie Muyela, who is a associate director at Lattice. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you.
Tell us a little about yourself and who is Lattice?
Thank you very much for having me today. So Lattice is an advisory firm that specializes in corporate finance, strategy development advisory services, new market entry, and we have a special, what is it called, subsidiary that's called Lattice Aqua, where I actually head. And at Lattice Aqua, we provide advisory services for aquaculture value chain and agribusiness value chain. So the services range from aquaculture value chain development, social and economic development in aquaculture, aquaculture financial management, and a few other services around that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about aquaculture, what is aquaculture exactly?
So aquaculture is basically this. It's all about fish farming. It's all about anything around fish, right? So looking at the entire value chain for fish, all the way from production to the market. So anything that is within the particular value chain for fish is basically aquaculture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why is it important that we have this conversation about aquaculture?
It's important because when you look at Kenya, for example, FAO did a study a while back, and from their study they noticed that we have around 1.14 million hectares of land that can be used for fish production. Okay. And with that land, we should be able to produce over 11 million metric tons of fish, which would come to around 750 billion worth of Kenya shillings. Which then, of course, would come to improving the economy. But that's not where we're at. We're far, far away from that. And so it's important for us to have this discussion because we need to think about why is this particular sector not developing as fast as it should be. Okay. And why, what are the things, what are the interventions that should come into play? And that's where my company Lattice actually comes into play, because as part of our Food Tech Africa program, we are aiming to improve food security through establishing and developing the aquaculture value chain within Africa. So basically starting from Kenya and hopefully transitioning to the rest of Africa.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we talk about aquaculture and production of fish as food, where does fish sit on our plates in terms of its importance?
So fish is, it's a protein, right? So when you look at all the other protein elements, we can consider it a rich protein. You know, when you look at the health benefits, the low fat, the amino acids, and every other benefit that it comes with, it is a white meat, and it's therefore considered a really rich protein. And so when you think about it in our plate, it should be one of the main components of our plate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do you think it has taken us this long to develop this sector if it's this important?
That's a very good question. So let me take a step back, and looking at the economic stimulus program that the government rolled out in 2009. The objective of that was to really take off and to develop the aquaculture sector within Kenya. And if you look at the development that came up from that, it wasn't as great as expected. And why was that? When you look at the aquaculture farmers, most of them do not really look at it from a commercial perspective. There is a need for a clear strategic direction on how to take it up, right? So the fact that it may not necessarily have succeeded and enabled the sector develop as fast as it was, it's not a bad thing, because we have lessons that we've learned from it, and therefore as a result of those lessons, it's more taking those lessons which have resulted to new projects coming up. Okay. So when you look at those new projects, what are the things that we are doing that is different? So we need to have a commercial mindset when you're looking at aquaculture sector. So not just thinking about it from a food production perspective without necessarily thinking about the sustainability of the businesses that are actually doing the farming, or the sustainability of the market across the country and even in East Africa.
Okay.
So yeah.
So when we talk about the market, for a very long time, fish consumption was a preserve of a particular part of the country, particular corner. Could that be one of the issues why this sector has taken this long to develop?
So I would say yes and no. So let me start with the no. From I think the 1960s thereabout, there's been the whole Eat More Fish movement, the campaign that is moving from the societies that were previously considered the fish societies and moving to other societies. And I think as a result of that Eat More Fish campaign, there has been a lot of communities coming on board and a lot of societies actually taking it up. But then when you look at the supply and the demand, there is high demand, there is low supply. Why is there low supply of fish? One of the factors we could think about is more so, production costs, right? So when you look at fish farming and you look at the production types of fish farming, you have pond, you have cages, and you have the recirculation aquaculture system, RAS. If you look at it and you do the economics around it, the most successful and the most productive one would be RAS, but it's so expensive. So when you look at the production costs, you're looking at the cost of, if you think about cost of feed, cost of seeds, that being fingerlings, just the cost of the capital investment that goes into it. It's not attractive to many people because unfortunately, most of us think short term. So thinking about the initial investment rather than the long term effect of the particular production type. So that could be another reason why it actually hasn't taken off as fast as it should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, for a long time, we've really relied on fish that is found naturally in the wild. Do you think we can continue relying on the fish that are found naturally in our lakes and rivers?
So unfortunately, there's a huge reduction of wild fish, and the reasons of that are, we've overfished. The natural resources are getting depleted. There is pollution, there is climate change. So looking at the available fish, the wild fish right now, vis-a-vis the demand, it's quite low, and therefore you cannot place high reliance on the wild fish anymore. And that's why most people are now actually moving to fish farming, which is proving to be very successful if you do it right. Okay. Yes.
You've talked about two major issues, pollution and climate change. Let's start with pollution. How bad is it?
So let's not move there. Cut.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Next.
Okay. So in terms of the kind of fish that is available in this country, which are the most available varieties, and which one is the most consumed and why?
So if you look at the two most popular types are tilapia and catfish. So actually tilapia is the most predominant one. And I think it also comes down to the preference, right? So there is, first of all, if you look at the production of tilapia, it's more intensive than the production of catfish. But then it all comes down to the preference, people's taste buds and what have you. So I believe that tilapia is more consumed than catfish, even though catfish is, producing it is actually easier than tilapia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I want to start an aquaculture venture, what do I need to know?
That's a very good question. I think it's pretty much the same as any venture that you want to undertake, right? What is the reason why you want to undertake it? What we are trying to the message that we're trying to bring across as part of Lattice and with our new Aquaculture Academy that we just launched the other day is when you're thinking about aquaculture, you need to think about it from a sustainable perspective. Don't just think about it as a like a hobby, right? Because the efforts and the costs that you need upfront are high. And so if you're not thinking about it from a sustainable, commercially viable perspective, then it's not going to work. So just like any business, you need to think about, first of all, do you have the capital, right? Where are you going to get the capital from? Do you have a business model? How do you want this to look like? So for aquaculture, for example, what kind of production facility do you want to undertake? Do you want to go down the RAS route? Do you want to set up cages? Do you want to set up ponds? Where do you want to set them, right? So temperature is very critical when you're thinking about aquaculture. So if you're thinking about setting up a pond in a place that's not warm enough, because tilapia is a very picky animal, right? So it requires a lot of attention, especially with regards to temperature, water quality, and water view. So have you thought about the environment? Have you thought about the temperature? Have you thought about the market? So before you set up a farm or even any business, like what's your market? How does your market look like? Where are you going to get the qualified staff? Because you need qualified staff to actually help you run it. So it's not like like buying a couple of fingerlings, putting them in the water and expecting them to thrive and get fish at the end of a production cycle. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about. And then of course coupling it all up with the financial model. So how do you see your costs? What are the costs that you expect to incur? And then how are you going to finance those costs?
Okay.
Yeah.
From what you've just mentioned, I'm trying to imagine, if I've never done this before, where do I get all this information?
That's a very good question. So Aquaculture Academy. So allow me to just take you back. So Lattice has been in this space from 2012. So it started, our journey started, with just having a conversation with a farmer who actually told us that he'd been doing farming for a while, but it wasn't profitable. So he didn't really understand why it wasn't profitable. And when you look at the Lake Victoria region, we would expect that, there is the lake, we have wild fish, we should have enough supply to meet the demand. And so as a result of that, a consortium of 19 private and public companies, both in Netherlands, Dutch and Kenyan companies, was formed, and that was Foodtech Africa. And so when Foodtech Africa was formed, our main objective was basically to improve food security through establishing the aquaculture, a fully integrated aquaculture value chain. And so we have gone through the journey from 2012, with a few success stories, setting up various aquaculture hubs, in Kenya, one in Kenya, which is Kamuthanga, one in Tanzania, and then one in Rwanda, as also, setting up a feed mill, which is Unga. And now we are at the stage where, in the last couple of years, we've always realized that one thing is missing, and that's human skilled capital. And so at the tail end of the Foodtech Africa program, we've now realized we really need to set up an Aquaculture Academy where people will come in and not just get the theory, it's more a vocational, practical training school. So if you want that kind of information, then come and join us at Aquaculture Academy.
Okay. Any qualifications for me to join the academy?
You don't necessarily have to have an aquatic science, degree, because there's so many people right now who are undertaking fish farming, but they don't necessarily have that background. So when you look at the courses that we intend to undertake, we are basically dividing it into 3 categories in terms of the trainees that we're going to bring on board. The first category is actually fish farmers and their staff. So they already have an idea of fish farming. So some of them are already successful. They're already undertaking commercially viable businesses. Some of them are struggling because they don't have that technical know-how, the practicality of it and all. So that's the first group. So I don't know whether you fall into the first group. But then, so the second group is trainers and extension officers. So we're not just training people who are going to be doing the fish farming, but people who are going to disseminate the information downwards, right? So for extension officers, for example, we expect this information to trickle down to the various counties and the farmers within the counties. For trainers, we could have trainers who have been funded by, donors to probably go ahead and improve the livelihoods of, the society that they're actually operating in. or even lecturers, you know, just upping up their skills as far as aquaculture is concerned. And then the last group that we have is actually graduates or students now, you know, those who are in school at the moment, in universities, institutions of higher learning, who are studying courses around aquaculture. So they could have already graduated, but so they need to have additional practical skills from an internship perspective for them to be able to graduate. Okay. So it could be an attachment or something like that. So those are the three groups. So you don't necessarily have to have that background of aquaculture. We've had a lot of inquiries in the last couple of months where people have come to us and said, we know we went into this venture, fish farming venture, without necessarily having the technical know-how. And we have paid significant price for it, you know, not in a good way, like huge losses. And so we want to take a step back and come back and learn what are the things we are doing wrong. How can we then improve going forward? Okay. Yes.
I think I'm one of the victims of that. So we'll go into that later on. In terms of making business sense out of it, earlier on you talked about looking for where you're going to sell it first and working it backwardly. So if, just like me, who woke up one day and thought, why don't I try fish? And I will build a pond, and I caught some fingerlings and they all died the next day. As a country, have we educated our people enough about this resource called fish and aquaculture?
So, in my opinion, I don't believe we have done a good job. So yes, we have the technical learnings, right? We have the higher institutions, we have the TVETs that you know, teach on aquaculture and the related sciences around it. But in terms of the viability of the businesses and how to actually run a business that's going to be sustainable, I feel that is lacking. And you know, for the last couple of years, through the Food Tech Africa program that we've actually undertaken, we trained over 1,200 people who would actually, and it was not necessarily structured trainings where we would invite people. We already had a curriculum, right? But it was more people coming into our commercial farms, say Kamuthanga, for example, and saying, we really want to learn how is Kamuthanga, a farm that is in Machakos, actually surviving? How is it doing well, while my ponds in, you know, Kisumu are really struggling, you know? And so it was coming in, using our curriculum, showing them the gaps, you know, why some things are not working. And that is mainly done through a practical element of it, right? So you can have all the technical know-how, you can have all the theory, but that's not going to take you to the next level with regards to making your business sustainable. So for us, that is our key focus at the Academy. And it's more building aquapreneurs who are going to have profitable and sustainable businesses going forward. We really do not want to have people come through the Academy and then, you know, a few months, a few years down the road, we realize that, you know, their businesses did not succeed. Then we would have failed as an institution.
Okay. Yeah. Even as you build the aquapreneurs that you've just mentioned, the biggest challenge for anyone, especially the young people, has always been capital. And I believe you don't have to start so big. So is there a threshold somewhere where someone can start with a particular number of fish that will make business sense?
So that's a good question. And it comes down to the production type. Now, unfortunately, a production type like grass, it's heavy initial investment because of the whole technology that goes into it. We've done a couple of business cases, you know, just to assess what would it take for a business to be viable. Unfortunately, one pond, and even if you think about an earthen pond, one pond is not going to be profitable. The cost that you're going to incur when it comes to the cost of feeds, the cost of fingerlings, the labor that you require, right? vis-a-vis the production that is coming out of your pond, or 1, 2, 3 ponds, when you do the math, it really doesn't add up. So it requires a lot of training on business acumen. It requires what does it take for you to run a sustainable business? And that's actually one of the courses that we're going to be undertaking at the academy. More so looking at the financial management around aquaculture. What you need to understand your costs, right? You need to understand, how do you monitor your costs? How do you manage your costs? Where are you going to sell, right? Because you can have all this production, but if you don't have a target market, then it's not going to be successful. Now, unfortunately for the sector, because it's let me call it still at its nascent stage, we've found out just from studies that we've undertaken before that financial institutions are shying away from funding aquapreneurs, if I could call them that, fish farmers. And it's more so, there is not enough information for the banks or for the MFIs or whatever financial institution to give them as much comfort as you have for like dairy or tea or coffee, where there's already proven concepts that have actually been shared with the financial institutions. And so that initial financing is very critical. It's a challenge getting it. And that's why we feel, looking at this from an ecosystem perspective, where we're not just saying, come in, get trained. It's more about, let's think about the ecosystem, right? Where are you going to get your feeds? Where are you going to get your fingerlings? Do we need an off-taker? Someone who's going to introduce you to the market, who's going to buy from you and then take it to the market? How do we make you investor ready from an access to finance perspective? So those are some of the things that we'll actually be looking at in the academy as well.
Okay. You've talked about the cost of production.
Yes.
And one of the highest things that always keep the cost of production up there is the feed. Are there ways that I can keep my cost of feed down?
So let's look at the cost of feed from the value side, right? From the we call it food conversion ratio. So the amount of feed that you give a fish vis-a-vis the weight and how much you're going to sell it at, that is how we would look at it in Aqua. And one of the ways, we always say cheap is expensive in the long run, right? So most farmers believe that, let me buy cheap, because at the end of the day, it's fish. But fish are very, very picky, especially tilapia. And so if you give your fish the wrong type of feed, then you don't expect your food conversion ratio to be ideal. Then it affects your production, right? So it's more about investing in the right quality and also knowing the right amount to feed the fish, right? Because yes, you can have the right quality, but if you don't have an awareness of the right quantity to give a fish at the various stages, all the way from fingerlings to outgrowers, then it impedes the growth of the fish, which then affects your production and the amount of revenue that you're going to yield at the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Julie. I think we'll take a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. For those joining us at home, today we are talking about aquaculture and what you need to know if you want to venture into fish farming. And Julie Muyela is here today to educate us on that. We are taking a short commercial break, but we will be back shortly. Welcome back to AgriTalk, and today we are talking about aquaculture, and with me is Julie Muyela, who is the Associate Director at Lattice, and she's been telling us a lot about what you need to know to start a successful aquaculture venture. On this second part, Julie, we've had Kenya imports fish from China, which sometimes I don't think makes sense to me, unless you can help me see the sense in that. Is it that the demand here is so high and we produce very little?
It's a very good question. So when you look at Kenya and you look at the per capita consumption of fish, it actually is half the average global, which is around 4.5 kilograms. Now that's really low. And to your point, you know, is it because is it because we don't like fish? No, we love fish. So it comes down to the supply and demand. So there is a high demand, but there is a low supply of it. And we touched previously on, you know, like the wild fish and what are the challenges that have resulted to, you know, a depletion or a reduction in the wild fish. That could be, that's one of them, one of the factors that's resulted to the low supply. And that's where now the Chinese fish come in. Is it ideal? No. But it's coming in to address the shortage in supply. And so why is there a shortage in supply? So in addition to the environmental factors around, you know, the wild fish, what we've talked about overfishing, pollution, climate change, there is also, you know, the cost of production, which we've talked about earlier. There is economies of scale. So if you're producing at a minimal scale, your cost is going to be high. And so, you know, the production environment in China or other countries who would be, you know, bringing in their fish is very different from ours. And so there is need for us to think about how then, what are the kind of interventions that we can have within the country, because this is an untapped market. It's such an untapped market that, you know, those who are thinking about interventions in this would actually thrive. And so it's more about, you know, the right mind sitting in the room and figuring out what do we need to do to actually make sure that the local sector is growing, and so it then minimizes the importation of fish going forward.
Okay. But why China? Why not any other African country?
Well, I guess it's cheap. It's when you look at the cost of fish from China and you compare to even the cost of fish from here, it's way cheaper to bring in the fish from China. So it all, as I mentioned earlier, it all comes down to the production environment. So for them, it's more, you know, the production is cheaper as compared to other countries. But I guess it's also being aggressive, right? So they're very aggressive, and that's why they're coming in faster. But there's something around the policies as well that we probably need to look at. You know, to be able to address that question. Why China? Why not somewhere else? What are we doing to actually minimize the importation of fish and rather, you know, increase the production from within?
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think it will have an impact on entrepreneurs who are trying aquaculture?
It has a huge impact, and it all comes down to the, you know, you've gone through your production, you've incurred all these costs, and then you go to the market and you look at your fish versus, you know, the fish from China, and the fish from China is coming in at even 30% less of a cost of a cost as compared to yours. So that is going to be taken up more than yours. So sometimes, you know, as consumers, we then fail to think about quality. You know, sometimes we are really driven by price as compared to other effects or other, you know, whatever is going to happen as a result of you taking up a product that's cheaper than another product.
Okay. There's one question that people always ask, that they can only take fish from Lake Victoria, and that fish from any other part is not that sweet. What is the logic behind that?
So it's a very valid point, and it comes down to, without getting much into the technicalities of farming, it usually is comparing, you know, fish from the lake vis-a-vis fish from the farms. So there's a last step that farmers, that pond farmers, some of the pond farmers fail to take, and that is spudging. You know, when you have fish in a pond, and you take them directly from the pond to the market, there is a certain taste that they have, and for you to do that, for you to be able to eliminate that, it's called purging. It's a process that's called purging, where you have to literally clean out the fish before you actually harvest them and take them to the what is it called, to the market. So that is not a process that's required for wild fish, but when you have the pond, and it all comes down to, you know, the chemicals and the environment that they're thriving within, and the step before the market that actually plays a big factor towards that kind of a conception.
Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier on, you talked about financial institutions having a problem to advance finance to aquaculture players. And you talked about data being one of the biggest problems. They don't have enough data. So how important is it for those who are already in this business and those who are joining to make sure that they start creating this data in terms of keeping records?
It is very, very important, and that's one of the things that we're actually advocating for in the academy. A couple of months ago, we actually did a study on the data-driven approach towards tilapia farming. And it was more about, we selected a few farms and then showed them how to collect data, provided them with the right equipment to collect data. So be it data on the water, the temperature, the pH, oxygen level, you know, even the number of fish that you're producing within any particular production cycle. And we realized that as a result of that, they were then able to make an economic sense of where the business is going. So what usually happens with some of the fish farmers is, you know, you've gone through, you've harvested your fish, you've taken them to the market, you've sold them. If I was to ask you, how much did you sell? But how much for you to sell that, for you to produce that, how much did it cost you? If you're not able to answer that question, how are you able to run a commercially viable business? So it comes down to data and record keeping is really, really important, because it enables you to understand where you've come from, where you're going, and what the journey between where you've come from and where you're going. How has that journey been? What are the things that you need to improve on? What are the success stories that you then need to take to the next level? Because if you don't have that, then you're not able to stand in front of a financier and say, you know what, I can run a successful business. Because they're going to ask for your financial records. They're going to ask for your production records. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to get access to financing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think either the government or the county governments are doing enough to help the sector?
So the devolution has played a big role, because we know that several counties have aquaculture within their CADP. So when on 7th of May, actually a few weeks ago, when we ran the best farmer competition and we included the counties within, we actually reviewed the CIDPs for the counties, right? And we identified several counties that actually have aquaculture within their CIDPs, and that for me is admirable. That's a first step to the right direction. And then, you know, some of them have of course taken it to the next level, where they are thinking innovatively about how to do aquaculture. So it can't be business as usual. It's more about what are the things that we need to do to actually take it to the next level. So I believe that the devolution has played a big role towards the development of the sector. Still a long way to go, but I think we're heading towards the right direction.
So as the other day, just yesterday, someone sent me some statement. The government is trying to reintroduce 4K Club to schools. And I don't know, is it the right move now to reintroduce 4K Club? Do you think it will help young people who are still in school learn more about agriculture and maybe even aquaculture, and even learn these things you're talking about, that they need to have information, they need to know where my market is before even I start the venture?
Yes.
Do you think it's a move in the right direction?
I think it's a move towards the right direction, and I'm taking, you know, say from the primary education all the way to fast forwarding it to the higher institutions of learning. And you look at the uptake of agribusiness, and particularly aquaculture. If you go to a higher learning institution right now and take for example, you know, you go to Egerton or even go to Nairobi University, and you look at the number of students that are enrolling for aquaculture or even agribusiness compared to commerce or medicine or, you know, all the other fancy, you know, it's not considered a fancy kind of a course. When you look at that, then it's more about why is that happening? Why don't we have enough students in the higher learning institutions taking up such courses? And it comes down to, you know, what is the perception they've seen as they've been growing up, you know? So introducing the 4K clubs is important because then that awareness is created from an early stage. You know, as you're going through life, you know that there's agriculture, there's levels of agriculture, you know, aquaculture included in there, but there's also other disciplines that you can actually think through, so that as you get to a particular point, then you know you have options, right? Then you appreciate, because we can't do without agriculture in Kenya. It is such a fundamental aspect of our economy, but that I feel that we are not taking up as much effort to improve it as we should.
Okay. There's a very good word you used, agribusiness. And I remember going through school, I never had that word. When we used to talk about agriculture, it was just about the hard stuff, getting a djembe and breaking your back in the farm.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the reasons why young people don't want anything to do with farming.
Yes.
They've seen their farmers, their parents suffer over the years, and they've not really made it. Because along the value chain, there are also a lot of challenges. Middlemen, conmen,
Yes.
all those.
Yes.
Do you think if now we point them in the right direction and tell them it's not just farming, it is agribusiness, look at it as a business, do you think that will make the young people have a different mental?
Definitely, and I think they already have. You know, when you look at you know, agriculture today versus agriculture, you know, that was practiced by our parents, our grandparents, the young generation, the youth who are getting into agribusiness, who are getting into aquaculture, are actually getting into it with a business mindset. And that is because of the kind of training that they're getting, you know, be it in university, be it in institutions, you know, practical training institutions like Aquaculture Academy. They're actually getting that, and it's giving them more awareness to understand that we don't have to do things as was done yesterday, right? Because how it was done yesterday may not have been as successful as it should be. And so it's more about them learning what are the new things, what are the kind of technologies, what is the, you know, the business mindset that you need to have to actually make this thing work. Because for most of them, it's either that or nothing, right? So most of them are getting into entrepreneurship and looking at agribusiness as part of their entrepreneurship. So it's either, you know, you make it work or it doesn't work. So we're going to do whatever it takes to make it work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier on, you talked about what you do at the academy. And one of the things you mentioned was training of extension officers. Why is it important that you train extension officers?
So it comes down to the knowledge that the extension officers are then going to disseminate to the farmers, to the local farmers. And if the knowledge is not as revolutionized or as advanced as it should, then we don't expect the production or the growth of the sector to be as fast as it should. So it's important for the extension officers to really understand what are the things that the smallholder farmers are actually having as a challenge, you know, and how then does training come in to narrow that gap, and how then do they take that training to the various counties that they're actually part of in terms of just disseminating that information.
Oh.
So it's really, really important for them to be part of the training.
Okay. And do you think there is a gap out there of extension officers?
I believe so, and I think it's more about the kind of feedback we've received since pre-launch and even post-launch, where, you know, as a result of talking to the various, you know, the agricultural officers and what have you, it's coming out clearly that there is need for the next level. So it's not just about going and having a group of farmers, you know, meet in a market somewhere and telling them this is what you need to do. It's coming down to you're telling them this is what they need to do, but also showing them this is how you do it. So it's not just about the what, but it's about the how. And the how cannot be theory. It has to be practical. And so that is really critical for the extension officers to also be aware of.
Okay. And how important is it for a farmer to have an extension officer visit their farms as often as possible?
I believe it is, and it's more about just looking at where the gaps are and how the extension officers can assist with bridging that gap, right? So what are the best practices? You know, the extension officers would tend to visit several farmers, right? And they tend to pick the best practices, what's working, what's not working, and how then is this going towards the development of the county, right? So when an extension officer comes to your farm, I don't know how frequent it is, but if an extension farmer was to come to my farm, I would actually maximize on tapping into the knowledge that they have, tapping into the experience that they have, and just seeing how they can help with regards to improving my productivity.
Okay. I know we've mentioned here and there about the academy that Lattice is running. What does it take for one to join the academy?
So it takes interest, right? So I think previously we were talking about, you know, the farmers who have tried it and flopped. That's not the end of the world, you know. It's more about, I believe that in life you need to learn about, you make the mistakes. What are the mistakes you've made and how do you learn from them, right? So when you look at existing farmers and even past farmers who are no longer farming, and then looking at the upcoming farmers, it's more about figuring out where are you at, right? What are you looking to do? What are the gaps in terms of knowledge? What skills do you need to take your business to the next level? And so that's where the academy comes in. Because when you look at the courses that we're offering, in as much as it covers, it's a whole range of courses, we will be tailoring courses based on the needs of the trainees, right? So we're not going to teach you on water quality if you know that, while you really don't know how to, you know, manage a hatchery. So we're going to focus on your weaknesses or on your gaps to make sure that by the time you're leaving, you actually are upskilled enough to take your business to at least the next level. So the way the academy is operating right now is we have very little investment on brick and mortar because we're partnering with the established fish farms. And that's because of the practical element that we require for the training. So we cannot just sit in Nairobi and say, you know, we're going to train farmers to be better fish farmers and to be, you know, aquapreneurs, and just come sit in a room and have a theoretical training. No, we have to go to the farms, and we are currently partnering with two fish farms. That's Kamuthanga, which is based in Machakos, and there's Juliet, which is based in Homa Bay. So those two partner farms are located in very strategic areas where they can be accessed by various people across the country. So we would expect the students to come in, the trainees that is, to come into the farms for us to then train them on the practical elements of aquaculture. So in addition to those two partner farms, we also have a mobile van, so more like a mobile model of training where we would go to where the need is. So an example is, you know, if you have a community-based group that has, say, 50 or so members that require training, and they already have an established pond somewhere where we can actually go and undertake the training, we would go there using our mobile training vehicle to actually make sure that we are meeting the need where it is.
Okay. What are the costs of joining the school?
So that's a good question, and the cost varies because the length of the courses vary. So we will be having 2-day courses, which are ideally basic, and so the expectation is, you know, if you come in today for a 2-day course, you're going to come back again for the next lessons, and then you're going to come back again, and you're going to come back again. So then we have a 2-day course, we have a 1-week course, which would be more intense, and within those, that's pretty much the practical element of the training. And then we have an advanced one and a mobile one. So the costs vary, and it's more about the tailoring of the courses to fit particular needs. So if it is standard courses, there is a price for that. So if it is you know, tailor-made courses, there's a cost for that. So for that information, we have it on our website, and you can check our website at www.foodtechafrica.com/aquaculture academy. So there is more information on that, and we have contacts who would be able to work with you to be able to tailor the courses that you need, and then be able to price that for your needs.
Okay. As we wind up, what do you think is the future of aquaculture in Kenya?
I believe that this is a sector that has a huge amount of potential, and it just requires a different kind of thinking. It can't be business as usual. It requires people thinking holistically, right? So not just people thinking within the silos as far as the value chain is concerned. It requires a thinking from an ecosystem perspective. Thinking, you know, if the academy is going to train you to be a better farmer, for you to run a commercially viable business, then what? You know, we need to answer the then what questions at every stage. So if that happens, then it requires you to have a market for your business. Then what? You know, you're going to be able to, you know, as you generate more revenue, you need quality seed, you need quality feeds. Who are the right suppliers to work with? You know, so it's kind of like a vicious cycle that goes round and round, and just making sure that you have the right players within the ecosystem. If we had the right players within the ecosystem, including financial institutions that are anxious and yearning for this sector to grow, we would go to the next level.
Okay.
So there is a lot of potential, a lot of untapped potential at every stage, right from production all the way to the market, all the way to, you know, access to finance that is yet to be tapped.
Okay. Thank you very much, Julie, for sparing time to be with us. I'm sure our viewers have learnt a lot today about aquaculture, and I'm sure from today onwards you will hear more about people wanting to join your campuses. For our viewers back at home, you've heard what it takes to be an aquaculture entrepreneur, what it takes. And the good thing is there's an academy you can attend, and Lattice will be in a position to help you with that. That is it from us today. Until next time, goodbye.